I'm Tristan, and this is Thinking About Politics. So today I wanted to try something a little different, and I wanted to respond to a video that I saw published by a group called Answers in Genesis. Answers in Genesis is kind of YouTube famous insofar as, they're a group of very right-wing, fundamentalist Christians who believe in creationism and a very narrow view of the Bible. Generally, I see a lot of content with folks challenging them on creationism and other sort of weird takes they have on evolution. But I had to respond today because they made a video in support of what is known as the Don't Say Gay bills. These bills, like the ones introduced in places like Florida, aim to prevent discussion of gender identity before the third grade, which is great, but there really is no discussion of gender identity before the third grade. Unless, of course, you mean acknowledging that some folks have, same-sex parents or that same-sex couples exist. So really what this is to say is that this bill doesn't really solve a problem that exists. It might only make things worse for people, and it's not a good example of small government in action at all. Now, because this is happening in Florida, obviously the Disney Corporation was pushed to make some sort of statement, and there was a little bit of a controversy because Disney CEO Bob Iger didn't really respond forcefully initially. There was an internal memo that was written. It essentially said that as a corporation, we can make the change we want to see in the world, i.e. a more inclusive and more tolerant society, by making great content and making stories that celebrate the diversity around us. He also said that, corporations that make public statements on political matters, don't really help those issues that they're trying to champion. This ended up blowing up a little bit in his face because that was not a forceful enough response for a lot of folks. But of course, folks like Answers in Genesis are looking at this entire bill and the Disney response through the lens of what you can call the gay agenda. What's the gay agenda? Well, going back decades, it's something that people in right-wing and conservative circles have said was an organized way to celebrate the quote-unquote gay lifestyle, and there are always undertones that somehow this was connected to pedophilia or that people were grooming children somehow. It was just a way to discriminate against gay people. It was a way for folks to try to justify their own ugly feelings. Thankfully, enough people are sort of able to come to grips with that, and society is changing for the better. However, as recently as 2004, things like gay marriage and the boogeyman of the gay agenda were a solid part of the Republican campaign for president under George W. Bush. These Don't Say Gay bills are not just popping out of nowhere. These folks who have for decades been bigoted against gay and lesbian and transgendered folks have not gone away. They're still around, and they're still trying to use anti-gay sentiment to gin up sort of hatred and their own political brand. I see you, Ron DeSantis. Don't think I don't. So let's watch this Answers in Genesis video, and I'm gonna respond to it. I've watched it once, but I didn't really write a script. And I'm just gonna fast forward a little bit through the introduction so we can get a little bit to the meat of the argument. Link to the full video will be below.
Over in Florida, where Disney has a really big footprint, think about Disney World and those sorts of things, there's legislation being put forth, being discussed. It's called the
Don't Say Gay
bill by those who oppose it.
What do the people who support this bill call it? That's what I want to know. That'd be a good question to have.
The legislation basically says that teachers or third parties cannot teach sexual orientation, gender identity issues, and really in line with the LGBTQ agenda.
Well, good news for the good reverend here. The first two things don't happen, and there is no LGBTQ plus agenda. So hopefully that puts your mind at ease just a little bit.
They cannot teach that, and they cannot advocate for it, and it must be age appropriate in all the other ages as well.
And if you talk to teachers in Florida, that is what's happening. Teachers in Florida, the Florida Department of Education mandate a curriculum that is age appropriate. This bill solves no problem that exists. Go on.
The fact that that is a controversy kind of shows the state of our culture. Some of the employees of Disney who are friendly to the LGBTQ movement got together with CEO Bob Chapek of Disney to voice their concern that Disney had made no public statements renouncing the legislation being discussed. After that conversation, he sent out an email, a memo to all the employees of Disney talking about why they have not done that, where they stand, and what they're actually trying to do.
All right, so here's the windup from him. It's, this bill exists in Florida. Disney didn't make a public statement. Some LGBTQ plus members of the Disney community got together with CEO Bob Ichek and, voiced their concerns. The response was not a public statement, by the way. The response was an internal memo. Now, what did this internal memo say?
And the email is very, very enlightening to what they think, believe, and what they're actually trying to do with their product. And so
this is called stacking the deck, what he's doing right now. He's like stacking all this before you hear what's actually been said. He's telling you what to think about it beforehand. And you just got to wonder why he doesn't trust you to decode this for yourself.
I'll read a couple of quotes from his email to his employees about why they're choosing to do what they do and being silent publicly on this, but still pushing for the agenda in a different way. He would argue, and I would actually agree with him, in a more powerful way.
Notice again, stacking the deck with this false idea of the LGBTQ plus agenda, which again doesn't exist. This is just like what hate preachers used to say in the 90s when I was a kid. They'd talk about the gay agenda coming for your kids. This is the same thing. Don't buy it. Ask this guy for his receipts. Ask him to really tell you what he's talking about. Where does this agenda exist? Who sets it? Do they have regular meetings? How does he know about it? You can't get any answers for this because there really are none. This is just a political, rhetorical tool.
So he says in his email to his employees, first off, he says, I want to be crystal clear that I and the entire leadership team are unequivocally standing in support of the LGBTQ employees, their families and communities and world. And so just,
well, not in public, but that's nice.
Note right off the bat that he, the CEO, and the leadership of Disney, they want to push for this LGBTQ agenda. So just to step inside the mind of a bigot for a second. What Bob Ichek said in a private statement was that we will unequivocally support you, just, not in public. And what this preacher here has taken from that is that there is a gay agenda and that Disney is trying to secretly push it. They're trying to secretly, engage with this agenda, force this agenda on your children somehow. Okay, I mean, this is just how bigotry works, right? You can't just justify the fact like, oh, I just feel oogie around gay folks. This, hey, I just have a deeply held belief that, you're just bad because of who you are. For some reason, I guess these folks don't feel comfortable, saying that to themselves, so they have to, build up these fake images of a gay agenda. It's just, you see it over and over and over again. I have no clue how people can keep falling for it. But go on. I think this is what a more inclusive world will look like, and they're on board with that revolution. So they're pushing for that change within what they are thinking and producing within their company. So as we've seen time and again, corporate statements do very little to change outcomes or minds. Instead, they often are weaponized by one side or the other to further divide and inflame. Simply put,
is that necessarily the case?
They can be counterproductive and undermine more effective ways to achieve change. I don't want anyone to mistake a lack of a statement for lack of support. We all share the same goal of a more tolerant, respectful world. Where we may differ is in the tactics to get there.
All right, and here's the criticism of Mr. Ichek's statement right here. Do we really all share the same goals if some of us are not willing to get off the couch and do something about it? If you're not willing to risk a corporate reputation or corporate profits for the idea of decency, for the idea of inclusiveness, to champion, your people in your community, people who work for your company, is that really support?
if I'm going to quietly oppose racism in my closet, but then go out and engage in a world where all ties are called in my favor and there's absolutely a white power structure I can take advantage of, am I really against racism in that case? I don't know. So what I'm saying is, like, there are just a lot of grounds upon which to sort of criticize this statement and take issue with it. None of them dovetail with anything this preacher is saying and his concern for this fake and fallacious idea of the gay agenda.
He's saying we got a better tactic to achieve the revolution that we're looking for within the LGBTQ agenda. So what is that better tactic? What is that better way? He says, I believe the best way for our company to bring about lasting change is through the inspiring content we produce. We are telling important stories, raising voices, and I believe changing hearts and minds. He then goes on to list many of their different movies and shows, things like Modern Family, Summer of Soul, Love Victor, Encanto, and many others, saying these sorts of stories are what we're using to achieve the change we desire. These and all of our diverse stories are our corporate statements. They are more powerful than any tweet or lobbying effort.
And all right, that's an interesting point right there. If only because, you know, things like Modern Family, I think, have done a lot to challenge people's perceptions of, you know, gay parentage, and that, you know, they say shows like Will and Grace in the 90s, you know, did a lot to sort of expose you know, what straight, you know, families who maybe didn't have a lot of contact with folks who were in the gay community, really sort of opened a little bit of eyes. It has limited impact. I want to also stress that, limited impact, but yeah, the impact's there, I guess.
He goes on, I firmly believe that our ability to tell such stories and have them received with open eyes, ears, and hearts would be diminished if our company were to become a political football in any debate. So we're going to stay out of it publicly, not make a public corporate statement, but we'll continue to use our stories, our movies, our shows, our characters to present these ideas in a fun, loving, engaging way where the characters are charming, the ideas seem very good and happy and necessary, and you can really indoctrinate.
Ooh, there's that word. You were doing so good, buddy. Indoctrinate. One might say that training folks to read the Bible in one very strict way that then says all gay folks are bad might be indoctrination, right? So maybe you don't want to be throwing that word around.
Multiple generations that these things are true. They taste so good going down when presented with the format of Disney movies. I mean, it's just, hey, it's a Disney character. Look how colorful, how playful, and look how likable that idea is, that person is. Therefore, their ideas must be likable too.
Yeah, I mean, have you been taking notes from them? I mean, I feel like your entire affectation is that whole like, hey, look at me, I'm just nice, reasonable guy. Yeah, you know, maybe we shouldn't tell people that gay folks exist ever.
It's a pill easy to swallow, but that pill is poison.
Ooh, he really wanted to emphasize that piece, huh?
As it's an anti-biblical worldview on multiple levels in regards to sexuality, even morality, and so forth.
Anti-biblical worldview with regards to sexuality. Well, certainly Disney also celebrates many other things that are anti-biblical. Witchcraft, magic, there are Greek gods. In one of them, Robin Williams plays a genie. You know, you're just hung up on anything that has to do with other people's private parts, ain't you?
And then he tells his employees, I hope we all will continue rowing in the direction of a better tomorrow. So the better tomorrow is the tomorrow that's more tolerant of LGBTQ sexual orientation, gender identity, transgender identity. That's where we need to be going. And they're pushing for that.
Yes! And for loving God, yes.
And now there are really three key things I want to address in what we just shared right there. Three ideas I want you to think about as a Christian from a biblical perspective and to understand.
I like how he's saying as a Christian. Like there's only one way to be a Christian. Let's hear what that is.
And that these things are not just with Disney, but with everybody else, and how to think biblically and strategically as we want to be equipped to defend our faith and engage the culture on biblical authority issues like sexuality and, of course, salvation. Point number one is this. There is no neutrality. Please understand.
You're either with us or against us, people.
Nobody's neutral, nobody can be. Disney is not neutral. The content creators of Disney, the people there making the movies, making the shows, they have a worldview, and they're going to do their best to communicate that worldview. And that worldview is either A, in line with the Bible, it's submitting to the Bible as the ultimate authority, and really using that as its framework to look at the world, how to engage the world, or...
Wrong. Wrong. No, my friend. You ever read this thing, man? There is more than one interpretation to almost every single one of these stories. The idea that you think there is one way to read that book, and that somehow you are holy enough to really divine the true meaning, that's the oldest trick in Satan's book, man. That is the oldest trick. And the gall of you, sir, to think that there is but one biblical worldview. Let me just ask you, what Bible are you reading? Is it the New International Version? Is it the King James Version? Is it the Recovery Version? Are you reading it in the Greek? Have you read any different translations? Or are you just picking one collection of, or one translation at random and assigning it value because it's the one you know, and you can't bear the thought that maybe, just maybe, you are not God's own chosen messenger on this planet? For shame, sir. For shame.
They're rejecting the Bible, and when you do that, you're left with really man's ideas in some way, shape, or form as your ultimate authority.
And here's what he's saying, right? He's saying that there's two worldviews. There's a biblical worldview, which, by the way, I have to tell you what it is. And there's everything else that's wrong. You can say that a different way. You could say it's my way or the highway. But again, I don't see anything that's making you so special, Mr. Preacher.
So as we see here with Disney, from the CEO down, they're saying, no, this worldview that supports the LGBTQ agenda revolution.
Okay, again, there is no agenda. There is no revolution. Unless you're talking about the revolution of equality and freedom that has been going on ever since America has been a place. It's been a long and unfolding process. It's been painful and imperfect, but it's gonna keep going. And if you don't like it, jump off the train now, man. There are plenty of theocracies for you to go take up residence in if that's what you want to do. We ain't doing it here.
That is the right one, which is in direct opposition to the biblical worldview, which defines sexuality very differently, gender orientation very differently than the LGBTQ plus agenda does. Point number two, not only are they not neutral, but they're also religious. You see, we often say here at the ministry that I work for that everybody's religious, everybody's got faith. The question is, where do you put your faith?
I think, okay, actually, wow, yes, I agree with you there. I actually have that sort of worldview where I think everybody operates on a certain level of faith. The question is, where do you place that faith? Let's hear what his options are.
Either you put your faith in the word of the living God, or you reject that and you put your faith in the ideas of man.
Okay, so you're either going to put your faith in the words of a living God or into the works of man. Okay, I have no idea what any of that means in real speak. I mean, are you talking about just the Bible? Because this right here contains maybe divine revelation of God, but it itself is the work of the hands of man. It's made of paper. It was made in a printing press. People translated it. Every step along the way, the meddling, grubby hands of human beings have been diving into this thing. Okay? That's not to say it has no use. That's not to say it has no wisdom. But for you to think that the copy you pulled off a shelf is the divine revelation and not a path toward it, a way to point you towards the right things in life, I think you're misusing this thing. And that's just my own 2 cents here. Now, if you're putting your faith in a book, right? If you put your faith in a physical copy of the Bible that you can read, you're still putting your faith in the hands of man. You're putting your faith in the idea that man has translated this in a way that maintains the divine message. You're having faith that people have not changed it on you over the eons and the eons and the eons. You're having faith that it is the divine word of God. That's, somebody told you that. Unless you're Joseph Smith reading golden tablets or you're Moses on Mount Sinai, your source of authority is generally somebody else's say-so. That's the faith of man. It is still faith in man. I have just never found it convincing that a story from the Iron Age was handed down from the mouth of God to me uninterrupted and unalterated. And plus, we know about times where the Bible was changed. So, what are you putting your faith in, sir? And are you really just putting your faith in yourself and in your own reading of the Bible? Again, seems like one of Satan's old tricks here. But I digress. Go on.
Because no human being knows everything. So we all got to believe things by faith. And so you're putting your faith somewhere, therefore you're religious by definition. And by the way, that faith has views about God, how to worship Him, how He's to be viewed, how to engage the culture in response to what He has said, if He does or does not exist. All those are religious ideas. Nobody's neutral. Everybody is religious.
Well, I think you can be neutral and religious, right? I don't understand why he's saying like non-neutral. I think he's saying like you're either for his narrow interpretation of the Bible or you're against him. And because he's God's avatar, you're against God. I think that's what he's getting at, and that's not true. I believe everybody is religious, but to an extent, depending on how you define that term. But no, that does not mean you having a different faith necessarily means you're not neutral. Or, putting your faith in a different place doesn't make you somehow against me or anyone else.
The last point is this: Disney is evangelistic. They are trying to win hearts and minds.
No, they're not. That's just not true.
As Bob Chapek said, he wants to keep open eyes and open ears and open hearts to the message so they can achieve the change that he so desires.
That change being equality for gay and transgender folks. Just to be clear.
They want to convince people of their worldview. And by the way, kind of following the theme of the first 2 points, everybody in some sense is evangelistic.
No, they're not. You have not proven that point. You're just repeating a claim. It's not true. Not in my experience, man. You ever heard of the Shakers? The Shakers just didn't believe in spreading their own religion to the extent that they've essentially died off. So, what are you talking about?
Everyone has a worldview. It's religious by definition, and we want to convince others that that worldview is the right one. And we're trying to evangelize people to our side.
No, I think that's how a very self-centered and selfish person approaches the world. But I think most people are actually pretty keen to live and let live. They really don't need to convince you that their worldview is right. They're more than happy to live their own world as long as you're not oppressive to them, and you guys can still cooperate enough to build them all together. You're fundamentally mistaken on this point, but go on.
And Disney is no different. They've got a worldview, and they're trying to bring people to their side. They want to win hearts and minds, to change this culture, to build to a better tomorrow.
I hate to disagree with you, but I've been doing it for a while anyway, so I might as well continue. I think Disney's main motive here is to make money. I guarantee you, if you were more of a cultural tour de force and could convince people that bigotry and hatred was the way, and that Jesus really wanted you to wag your finger at folks who were different than you, maybe Disney would actually be on board with you. But you're losing this fight, and I think that's God's doing.
Ideas of the LGBTQ agenda are utterly anti-biblical.
There is no LGBTQ agenda, and there is no anti-biblical worldview. The Bible means so many different things to so many different people. I think it'd be hard to find a worldview that is completely incompatible with a reasonable read of the book.
Go against God's clear revelation of His Word, how He's designed things, how He's made things, and so they are not compatible with the biblical worldview.
Oh yeah, and can we be clear here? We're just talking about your biblical worldview. We're not talking about the biblical worldview. I mean, I'd like to direct your attention to 1 Corinthians 12. Here, St. Paul is writing to the city of Corinth and telling the Christians there about how to deal with one another. See, there were people there who were former pagans, there were former Jews, there were different types of people, and how are they going to come together and form a single body? Well, there are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and everyone is the same God at work. And if that didn't drive the point home far enough for you, check out what starts happening at verse 12. Just as the body, though one, has many parts, but all its many parts form one body, so it is with Christ. For we all were baptized by one Spirit so as to form one body, whether Jews or Gentiles, slave or free, transgender or cisgender, and we were all given the one Spirit to drink. Even so, the body is not made up of one part but many. The eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you, and the head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. So when I see this preacher trying to tell me that a part of my community, my gay, transgender, lesbian, bi, queer, whatever friends, are not like genuinely part of God's plan, or are not part of a real worldview, or somehow that people need to be protected from their existence, I just see Paul trying to tell those Corinthians that the hand can't tell the eye, hey, you're not part of me. We're all part of one another. We are all indispensable. And you, Mr. Hate Preacher, should really read the Bible sometime. It will open your eyes.
We as Christians really need to realize we are not the only fishers of men. And Disney is a fisher of men, it's a fisher of children, fisher of teenagers, fisher of all people to try to reel them in into basically anti-biblical worldview. Now,
so he's not, I want you to note here, he's not against the fishing part. He thinks that you should be out fishing and reeling in children and teenagers, but for him, not for Disney. Okay.
it's done with a pretty picture, engaging movies, good technology, engaging visuals with the movies and soundtracks and so forth, but it's still poison at the core because it's anti-biblical. God made us.
Again, I think as I proved you wrong, that your view is the anti-biblical one, according to Paul's letter to the Corinthians.
He knows how we work best. When we're in line with His Word, things always work better.
Exactly. And God created us all to operate as one body. And according to the biblical worldview, God wants us to love one another, thy neighbor as thyself, and God with all your heart. I don't see how that's possible if we cannot acknowledge the existence of our gay and transgender friends. I'm sorry. It seems very anti-biblical what you're saying. Which, again, this is not, you are not trying to save souls here. You are about some sort of weird political agenda. And I just think people should know that you're using the Bible for real sacrilegious purpose. And that's icky.
Dear Christian, we are not the only fishers of men. Let's remember that, stand firm, and be equipped to engage these ideas from a biblical perspective and not be caught off guard by the evangelistic tactics even of Disney.
So yeah, that was depressing. Look, these anti-gay forces in our society have been around for a long time. They have been complaining about a gay agenda targeting children as far as I can remember. And it has always been a fallacious lie used by religious conservatives around election time usually. This Florida bill is the opposite of what small government is. Small government means you don't have a law unless you need it, and these folks are trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist purely for political gain. There couldn't be anything more cynical or more like good government about this. It is just wild. Not to mention the fact that you have someone trying to back up this type of hateful discrimination for really, worldly gains with the Bible, of all things. It is inappropriate and wrong in the extreme. I don't think you should be using it as a tool to discriminate against people. That just seems like you're missing the point of the entire story. But anyway, I'll stop there. I didn't really have any notes this time. Let me know if this got too rambly or if you like this sort of setup. We'll see what happens in editing. I don't know. Anyway, you've been great. Thanks for watching. Until next time, keep thinking.
Now I'm busy with this mule.